Welcome back to the deep dive. So you've handed us this fantastic set of sources, including a really insightful piece of critique on a very ambitious project.
It's a great project.
It really is. Today, we are diving deep into how architecture can tell the story of a nation's, well, its economic surge.
Right?
We're looking at a sustained investigation about Guyana, and it's all built around this powerful question. How can I show Guyana's economic development through architecture and processes of construction?
Mm-hmm.
So our mission today is to take that feedback you got and turn it into a super clear visual roadmap for what comes next for that evolution.
And that core question is just so strong. It's exceptional because it frames buildings as more than just, static objects.
They're not just houses or offices.
No, they become living records. They're records of policy, of investment, of huge societal change. You're connecting the physical thing, the beams, the foundations, to this huge, often turbulent story of progress in a place like Guyana.
And for anyone listening who might be a bit new to this whole process, a sustained investigation is basically a visual argument.
Exactly. You make it over a whole series of pieces. And the challenge, the real trick, is to show how that big, complex idea,
Economic development.
translates into concrete visual choices. I mean, the texture you use, the materials, the composition, that journey of inquiry, of practice and revision is what really proves the power of your idea in the end.
Okay, so let's unpack this. I think we should start with what's already working really well,
Absolutely.
because the feedback makes it very clear that conceptually, you are already succeeding. The investigation comes through powerfully across the whole gallery of artworks.
Right.
We have a solid foundation to build on.
We really do. And let's focus on those strengths in the materials and processes because that's where the key insights are.
Right.
Your use of materials is already doing the work. It's highlighting that difference between, say, a traditional reliance on local timber and then the introduction of modern, often imported materials.
Like concrete.
Exactly, like concrete. That contrast between the concrete and the wood, it's already working as this perfect visual metaphor for architectural evolution, all driven by new wealth.
What I thought was so fascinating in the critique was how fast the reviewer locked into the sensory part of it. They said the use of texture stood out first, that it made the pieces feel, and this is a quote, more real.
Like a shrunken down model. I saw that.
Yes, like a tiny dynamic construction site. And then adding things like trees or green spaces just makes the whole thing feel more alive.
And these aren't just, minor details. These are major visual wins.
Yeah.
They connect the artwork directly to the reality of the landscape.
Which is where the critique gives us that direct marching order.
It does. It forces that visual growth. They love the texture, but the suggestion was crystal clear. To strengthen the entire body of work, you need to apply texture and value to all the pieces consistently.
So we're moving from texture as a successful element in a couple of pieces to making it a defining feature of the entire investigation. That's a huge cue for revision.
It's everything. And this is how we connect that very practical feedback to the bigger requirement of making a visual argument.
Right.
A successful investigation has to clearly show growth, experimentation, and crucially, refinement. Targeted refinement, making sure that specific texture and value language is consistent across the board. That's the visible evidence. It's proof of that cycle of making, reflecting, and then revising. It shows you're being intentional.
So you're not just making more stuff.
No, you are actively strengthening the visual vocabulary of the whole series.
Okay, so we have the visual goal, consistent, powerful texture, and value. But the journey matters as much as the destination, right? We have to make sure the process of evolving these visuals is documented. How do we make documentation sound less like, boring paperwork and more like part of the art?
Think of it less like a museum gallery and more like a detailed scientific journal. You're submitting up to 15 images, and they're not all finished works. They can be process documentation, sketches, material studies, little models you made, even architectural floor plans of the buildings you're looking at.
So the goal isn't just 15 great pictures.
Not at all. The goal is to show a skillful synthesis of materials, processes, and ideas developing over time. If you submit, say, a concept drawing, it has to clearly relate back to your core question about economic development.
So like a drawing of a proposed coastal high-rise right next to an early sketch of a timber home.
Exactly. That contrast shows the intellectual journey, not just the final product.
And then there's the written part, which is just the ultimate test of being concise. For each piece, you've got these brutal character limits.
100 characters for materials used.
And 100 for processes. That's it. It's like writing the entire concept for your masterpiece in a single tweet.
It forces discipline.
It really does. Your captions have to be so clear and provide real insight. You can't just say pencil on paper.
No, they have to reflect the specific material contrast or the structural process that you're trying to show in that piece. That discipline is key. You have to visually and in writing document the whole thing. The practice, the revision, and the sequence of the images has to tell that story.
The sequence is the narrative.
Right. It should literally move from your initial pieces, where the texture was noted, to the fully revised works, where that texture and value is now consistent. It's proof of intentional growth.
Okay, this brings us to what feels like the biggest challenge, but also maybe the highest level of synthesis. The visual evolution has to serve the intellectual question. How do we make sure the architecture links convincingly to the economic development part, not just the aesthetics? We need some thinking tools.
Absolutely. And this is where critical frameworks become, well, they're indispensable. They're tools for reflection and revision. Let's start with the most practical one first, to address the critique directly. Formal analysis. This is your primary tool. You use it to objectively analyze how the visual elements texture, the concrete versus wood contrast, value, how they all work together to create meaning. It helps you articulate how you strengthen the work.
So that's the what and the how. What's next?
Next, we add context. So you use contextual or historical analysis. You investigate the history, the cultural significance of the architectural choices in Guyana, why the shift in materials, what global economic pressures were at play.
It grounds the work.
It grounds the work in its specific time and place. It highlights why these buildings matter economically.
And now for the framework, that seems like the most powerful fit for your investigation, but it can be tricky.
The Marxist critique.
Yeah. And before anyone tunes out thinking this is some heavy political theory lecture.
Right, let's be clear. For an artist, for you, a Marxist critique isn't about politics. It's about power and resources.
Okay, so the tool.
It's a tool. It's a lens for looking at how literal structures, buildings, reflect the structure of wealth, of class, of labor, and economic power in a society.
But wait, I mean, running a formal theoretical analysis on a drawing sounds incredibly complicated. Is there a risk that focusing on this heavy theory could overshadow the actual visual power of the art?
That is a crucial question. The visual work always leads. The framework is just vocabulary to explain the why. You don't need to write a thesis.
So you just ask questions.
You ask questions visually. Who benefits from the imported materials in this new high-rise? Does this sleek concrete tower stand in stark contrast to the older timber housing nearby? The framework just helps you articulate how those structures reflect social hierarchies that are tied to new money, like oil wealth.
I see. So if you're showing a big new skyscraper next to a traditional wooden house, the formal analysis describes the sharp texture and the scale difference. But the Marxist critique gives you the language to connect that visual contrast directly to, say, economic disparity or shifting development priorities.
That's the synthesis. You're using the contrast of materials to illustrate the contrast of wealth.
Wow. Yep.
Yeah. You're weaving together material choice with economic theory. You connect the literal structure of the building to the invisible structure of the society it sits in. It makes your argument so much more layered than just a pretty picture of a building.
One last thing on documentation. We have to stress originality. If your piece references another source with a photo of a building, you have to include a short citation.
And more importantly, you have to show observable transformation.
Meaning your art goes way beyond just copying it.
Way beyond. And this is non-negotiable for every single piece. Absolutely no generative AI tools at any stage of the creative process. It has to be your hand, your inquiry, your unique transformation.
So what does this all mean for the immediate path forward? What are the moves?
I think it's 3 clear integrated moves. First, consistently apply that texture and value across all the pieces. That's your targeted revision. Second, rigorously document that process, the sketches, the models, so your 15 images tell a clear story of that revision.
And third,
use the critical frameworks, especially formal and Marxist critique, to articulate the link between the look of the building and the Guyanese economic narrative. That's how you get that critical synthesis.
So the visual evolution really hinges on intentional experimentation and revision. Don't be afraid to take risks in how you refine your style. Explore different ways to show that contrast between the smooth, modern concrete and the rougher, older wood. You might discover something new about what it all means. And okay, here's a final thought for you to chew on. Considering your sharp focus on process and construction, the parts that reveal investment and labor, how might you use the unbuilt?
The unbuilt.
Yeah, the temporary structures, the scaffolding, the deconstructed floor plans, even the shadows of the planned buildings. How could you use those things to visually represent the cost or the potential of economic development instead of just the finished, shiny building at the end? Think about what the construction process reveals about an economy that the finished building might be designed to hide.